Oh, it's Christmas time. Christmas time is here again. And it finds every single one of us in exactly the same place. It finds us wanting. I mean, think about it. What do kids want? They want to take full advantage of this season. I mean, my kids are asking for treats before 7 a.m. They want to stay up all night. They can't wait for what they hope they want to get on Christmas morning. And as you get a little bit older, you trade some things for wanting someone in your life. Unless that something is a car with a red bow parked in my driveway. I mean, just saying. But we want someone significant in our life. We want to be or able to spend time with the someones that matter. What do I want for Christmas? I want Notre Dame to win a national championship. I got a few Notre Dame fans here. Yeah, any Alabama fans? Security, right here. I'm kidding. I'm kind of kidding, okay? I'm watching you, all right? No. Oh, what do parents want? Parents want their kids to be happy, right? They just want to see the joy in their face, and then they want maybe like 30 or 45 minutes of no chaos. And then as the kids get out of the house, it's like you take a little bit of that chaos back. There are people that we can't wait to see. We want to spend time with them. And there are some people that we would do anything to have a Christmas with them again. Isn't it amazing how this time of year brings up this collision of emotions, of beauty, wonder, and sometimes terrible. I mean, it begs the question that's underneath the surface of our life. Is there more to this beautiful, terrible, wonderful life? And I think there's an answer to that question in Christmas, if you have the room to receive it. The question that I want to ask is, do you have room for Christmas? Do you have room for Christmas? And by room, I don't mean the to-dos that you still have in front of you. I can see the glow of some of your cell phones. Walmart closes at 6 p.m., okay? If you got gifts to buy or places to be, we're worried about that. We're worried about the events that are in front of us. Do we have room to wrap the gifts and make the food and go and get a picture with the Christmas weed? It's like, how do we fit all of this in? I'm not talking about the to-dos. I'm not talking about our expectations that we all bring, whether we say them or not. I'm not talking about the relationships do we have room for people and to connect with each other? Do we have room for the people that we really struggle to connect with? Because let's be honest, every one of us has a crazy cousin Eddie in our family that it's like, do I really want to make room for them? I'm not talking about that. You see, it's easy to confuse the activities of Christmas with the gift that Christmas invites us to receive. Do you have room for Christmas? Because you can only experience what you make room to receive in your life. Not what you assume, not what you think might have happened last year, not what tradition brings. It's what you individually, what each of us make room to receive in our life. And I think this is part of the challenge, because whether you realize it or not, we can fill our life up with things that cause us to miss the gift. It was a few years ago, I was invited to help rebrand the internship program here at Cedar Creek. It was an incredible invitation for me. It was significant because I was one of the first interns that Cedar Creek ever had. And so I look back on my internship experience and the way that God kind of developed me as a man, a leader, and all of that stuff through that. And I was thrilled to be a part of this. And I knew right away one of the experiences that I wanted to make room for these interns was a trip to Atlanta. It was a conference called Catalyst. And at the time, it was only located there. It was a huge event, 15,000 emerging leaders, great experience. And so we put that in the calendar, and I knew if I was going to be a part of this team headed down to Atlanta, I didn't want to stay at one of those cheap hotels, where they advertise free breakfast, but when you show up, it's like free breakfast that's cornflakes and Raisin Bran. It's like, who eats Raisin Bran? One hand, thank you. I was going to say dogs eat Raisin Bran, but you're clearly not a dog, okay? So you matter, you really do. But it's like, come on. There's more options than Raisin Bran. So I went to work. I found a hotel, and I needed a group rate for like 10 rooms. And so I get in contact with some like corporate sales guy. I think his name was Kevin. And we email back and forth. And I'm like, tell me about your hotel. He's like, it's new. And I'm like, tell me what you serve for breakfast. He's like, hot breakfast. And I'm like, okay, we're in. So this was like 10 months in advance. And so we get the rooms lined up. In October, we load up 2 vans, like 2 extended white, vans, 2 vans of crazy, headed all the way down to Atlanta. 142 bathroom stops later, and like a 14-hour trip that should have been like 9.5. We show up at midnight 30 at this hotel, and it looks nice. And I get out of the van to go in to kind of get the room keys and all that stuff situated, and I look over to where they're serving breakfast. Oh, it's going to be an awesome breakfast. You could just tell all the places where all of the, warm options were going to sit. I was like, this is great. So I get up to the counter. The woman's like, hey, how can I help you? I'm like, I'm here to check in. She's like, last name? I'm like, Ben Snyder, Snyder. And she's, sir, I don't have any rooms for you. I'm like, okay, let's Snyder, not I, some people do that. And so she's like, actually, every single room at the hotel is taken. There ain't no room at the inn. And I'm like, do you want me to unleash all 20 interns on your hotel? I'm like, this has got to be a joke. I've got emails here from Kevin. Kevin has 10 rooms available for me. And, and she's like, sir, even if I had rooms, they're all taken. I don't have any to give you. I was like, oh man, what am I going to do? This is really awkward. I got 2, we're ready to go. And I have these emails. You see, I had filled up or held on to things that I assumed were going to give me the experience that we wanted. I think we all would do that. Now, I'm not here to point fingers and blame anybody, but clearly it's Kevin's fault. And I think sometimes in life, we hold on to things. We fill our life up with stuff that we assume is going to give us the experience, the significance, the sense of belonging that every single one of us crave. For some of us, that's why we go to work. That's why we're chasing something, the next accomplishment. Because if we do that, people will be like, hey, you matter. I think that's why sometimes we care about our physical appearance. Because if we're attractive enough, if we look great, people will look at you and make us feel like we matter because we're physically attractive. I think that's why we care about our bank account. That's why we care about some of the stuff that we have or that we drive. I think that's why we think about the friends, what people say about us. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that any of these things are bad. The truth is, they won't last. And then the question becomes, who are you then? Because there'll be some day where you can't go to work. There will be some day where your body begins to drag, sag, and wrinkle its way somewhere you don't want it to go. It's just reality. Merry Christmas, right? Someday you're going to say goodbye to your loved ones. Someday you're not going to be able to do some of the things. Who are you then? You see, if we're not careful, we'll hold on to these things, hoping they can deliver something that they can't. And we will be left wanting. So here I am in the hotel lobby, and I'm looking around, and everybody else is smiling. I'm like, yeah, you got a cozy bed and a hot breakfast. I'm thinking, how am I going to break the news to the 2 vans, I could turn it into a Bible lesson. I'll walk out, and I'll be like, all right, everybody, this is how Mary and Joseph felt at Christmas. There was no room, and so God's just given us a little connection to that story, so let's start looking for a barn, y'all. It's like, that wasn't going to work. So maybe I could be like Matt Foley and be like, Chris Farley. It's like, hey, guys, guess what? We're going to sleep in a van down by the river. Eventually, they came back and said that they had found some rooms like 30 miles back the way that we came. So we get in the vans, we go back, we get in the parking lot, or we get there, get into the parking lot, and the hotel looks kind of... whatever that word is. And I get into the lobby. Oh, no joke. I get out of the van. It smells like a barn. I'm like, God, seriously? What are you doing to us? And I get into the lobby. I look over where they're serving breakfast. Guess what they're serving for breakfast? Your favorite. Raisin Bran. I was talking to a few of the interns who are now on staff. I mean, this was like 6 or 7 years ago. I was asking them for some of the details that they remember, and they don't really remember much of the hotel stuff. They have all of these other memories. But that's the only memory that I have of that trip. which means sometimes for some of us, we fill our lives up with missed expectations and hurt and disappointment or guilt, embarrassment, and we begin to hold on to those things. We fill our life up with that so much that we miss out on some of the other incredible things that are happening all around us. Do you have room for Christmas? Because there is only one voice that can communicate your significance for eternity. And there is one voice that can help break through any guilt, shame, doubt, insecurity that came on Christmas. Do you have room? Because I think that's what Christmas is really all about. The problem is it's hard to see that in the story of Mary and Joseph and the donkey and the manger 2,000 years ago. In some ways that becomes fairy tale. It becomes tradition, something that we just tell, but we don't really find ourselves in that story. And so I want to tell a different Christmas story. I want to share the story that Matthew, one of Jesus' disciples, shares. Matthew grew up as a Jew. Eventually, he was invited to follow Jesus. And after he witnessed Jesus' life, death, burial, and resurrection, he would go around telling people stories about what Jesus taught, what life with him was like. In fact, the demands for his time outpaced his ability to deliver on all of that. So he sat down to write an account of Jesus' life so that it could be copied and passed around so that as many people as possible could not only read the Christmas story from his perspective, but hear all about who Jesus was. And so I want to share his Christmas story. You can follow along in your notes or on the screen. He said, this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah. And I've already lost some of you. Okay. You're like, genealogy? I'm not really into Ancestry.com. Or, if you are familiar with the King James Version, this is where all of the begats are. It's like so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so. And so whenever I get there, I begat my way somewhere else, It's like, let's go to Luke chapter 2, okay? And if you're sitting here, you're like new to church, and you're like, oh, great, this is going to be a bunch of Bible talk. Can someone pass the eggnog? Because I'm going to need to get these lords a-leaping if this is going to keep going, Just give me a couple minutes. I promise this won't be boring. Here's what's interesting. From Matthew's perspective, he was Jewish, writing to a Jewish Christian audience. And as soon as he says genealogy, that is significant to them. They care much more about your ancestry than they do about your resume, where you live, what car you drive, any of that stuff. Matthew's audience would have leaned in at this point, and I think we should too. And he begins with two names. He says that Jesus the Messiah is related to he's one of the sons of David, King David. He's from a kingly line, which would have been significant to them. And the bigger name is he's a son of Abraham. If you could trace your lineage back to Abraham, you were a true-blooded Jew. It gave you the full rights as a Jewish person in their faith and in their nation and in their community. So they're all listening, and then they want to pay attention to some of the other names that are in this mix. So here's where he begins. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was the father of Jacob. If maybe you've heard of Jacob's son, Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. That's a cultural reference for some of us. So when they get to Jacob, they're going to lean in because Jacob had 12 kids, 12 that became 12 tribes of Israel, 12 states. And the tribe that you were from mattered to Matthew's audience. And so he says, Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. And so automatically they know that Jesus comes from the line or the tribe of Judah. Again, this mattered to them. He keeps going. He says this, Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother? They would have been sitting there going, women don't have room in genealogies. Women don't belong here. Now, I know for some of you, you're like, well, that sounds it's 2018, Ben, come on. That's inappropriate. But the truth is, in that culture, women were not considered people. They were considered property. I'm not saying you have to like that. That's just reality. They were the property of their father or their husband. And so when you talk about genealogy, why are you talking about women? They would be wondering. And not just any woman, they're talking about Tamar, which you might not know the story of Tamar, but they would have heard this story in Sunday school because Tamar was Judah's daughter-in-law. And one night she dressed up and seduced him in an awkward, complicated story that you can read for yourself some other time. I don't have to read that to your kids. Anyway, she hangs out with Judah and then gets pregnant and has twins. And the whole audience would have been like, this is really embarrassing. This isn't one of Judah's finest moments. It's his most embarrassing moment. Matthew, why are you telling this in the Christmas story? This is the Christmas story. What is this? How does this build the significance of Jesus? It doesn't. And here's how Matthew explains it. He doesn't. He just keeps going. He says Perez was the father of Hezron, and this is where it gets a little complicated because we don't use these names in our everyday life. So sometimes, in fact, if you really want to geek out on this stuff, all of these names would have been significant to them. You can go back and see the historic significance of them. I would encourage you to do that. So they would have known the characters and the roles that they play in the history of the Israelite nation. But for, it's like Pete and Henry and Randy, and then you get to this name here. This one's relevant because it's Aminadab. It's for you, Sam, Noah. They're watching right now. That's right. That's culturally relevant. Last night I had an 8-year-old school me on how to dab, so I probably didn't even do that right. Aminadab and then Nathan, and yeah, that name looks a little fishy, so we're just going to keep going. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother, another woman. I was just beginning to build up momentum again. You were on a roll. I was tracking with you. Why are you bringing up another woman? Not to mention just a woman. You were bringing up Rahab. Now, if you went to Sunday school, you know Rahab was a hero in the Jericho story because she housed some of the Israeli spies. That's the way that we tell the story. But to the Israelite, to the Jewish people listening to this, Rahab was not a pure-blooded Jew. And not only that, Rahab was a harlot, which meant whether by choice or by force, she was on the lowest rung of the socioeconomic strata. She doesn't belong in a place of significance. That's the way they would have thought about this. Why is Matthew bringing this up? Matthew, he just keeps going. Look, he says Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Now, another woman, Ruth, or not just any woman, Ruth was a Moabite. The problem here is this is racial tension and religious tension. The Israelites hated the Moabites. They don't belong with us. We are separate from them. And so Matthew is bringing up all of this tension. Now, if I could just take a time out here. For those of you that somewhat think that this story is legendary, that people just made up stuff about Jesus' life, that it's all just a fairy tale, this is evidence why they weren't trying to write a fictitious account. Because if they were, they wouldn't include, Matthew would have never included these details. By Matthew including these details, he's raising the skepticism of his audience, not having them go, wow, look at how amazing Jesus is. And so you got to ask the question, why would Matthew include that unless it really happened? You see, King Herod, who existed at this day and time, he expunged anyone of insignificant from his genealogy. The historians that keep track of some of the details that he wrote versus what was true, they can verify that he eliminated any name that didn't make him look like Herod the Great. And so Matthew's audience right here, they're kind of leaning in. They're going, I don't understand why is he bringing all of this stuff up? And he just keeps going. He says, Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of King David. Finally, a name that I can get behind. The David who defeated Goliath. The David that's on the Israeli star of David. That's significant. And his son, the wisest and richest king in all of Israel. Now, there's some momentum. Thank you for bringing some names that I can feel really good about. But that's not why he wrote this. He said whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Now, Solomon's mother had a name. Her name was Bathsheba. And he's not eliminating her name because he didn't want to bring it up. In fact, what he's trying to do by mentioning it this way is he's trying to bring up all the sordid details around David's life, around someone who everybody elevated and respected and honored. You see, David and Uriah were best friends. David and Uriah, he was one of his closest, best warriors. And one day while Uriah was off at war, David decided to have a secret affair with Uriah's wife, Bathsheba. And things get complicated, unexpected pregnancy. Long story short, David decides to eliminate his best friend in battle. He tells everybody to back off, let Uriah die to try to cover it up. And Matthew is bringing up conjuring up all of these details in the audience around a name that everyone respects and honors. And people would be like, why are you telling the Christmas story this way? I think the reason is because it had become common to think that God was only interested in people who had their life together. That God was really only interested in people who looked the part, smiled the part, were successful, didn't have any dysfunction or problems, any discrepancies in their life. That God was only interested in people on the nice list. And you know what? The naughty list, God ignored. And so if that was their perception of God, that's how they began to treat each other. that this is what was common then, does it sound familiar to where we are at today? You see, in Matthew's telling of the story, he's trying to illuminate that the people that culture tends to not have any room for, he's illustrating that they can all be brought into God's family. And even the people that you elevate up as strong and successful and great, even they need the gift that Christmas brings. Do you have room for Christmas? You see, it's easy to confuse impressing God, trying to please God, trying to impress other people, with receiving the gift of grace that he offers. And in Matthew's telling, we are reminded that we all come as equals to Christmas in need of God's grace. I think part of the reason this was so significant to Matthew was because he grew up Jewish. And I don't know what happened in his childhood, but at some point he decided to abandon his family and even abandon his friends and his countrymen to become a tax collector and serve the Roman Empire. This was considered like an act of treason. And so as he pursued this, I wonder if he was trying to establish himself, because that would have been a good paying job. It would have put him into a different social strata, given him new opportunities that maybe he could have never imagined. And so as he pursued all of this, I think it left him wanting. And one day, while he was collecting taxes in a Jewish community named Capernaum, he could hear the teachings of a guy by the name of Jesus. And he talked about what life with God was like, and it made his heart come alive. It began to address the question, is there more to this life? And as he looked in the mirror and thought about his own life, he came to the conclusion that for him, all hope was lost. That God doesn't have room for people like Matthew. Until one day, Jesus came up to the very table where Matthew was collecting taxes and said, will you follow me? Will you be one of my disciples? I think Matthew, me? You have room for me? No. That's not the way that I've been taught. I think that's why Matthew told this Christmas story, to send a message that God made room for you, every one of you. Will you make room for him? See, I don't know what you've been filling your life up with. It's so easy to try to fill it up with all that this world has to offer, but it won't last. It can't resolve the eternal longing to belong somewhere. And maybe your life has been filled up with guilt and embarrassment and mistakes and this sense of insignificance. Maybe under the surface, you're like, I don't know if I have room for, I don't know that God has room for me. If that's where you're at today, Jesus came to deliver a message that hope for you is not lost. cares of this life, the worries, the stress, the pressure, they're always trying to squeeze the spiritual life right out of us. I think that's what makes Christmas special. It should cause us all to pause and say, what am I making room for? As we dig into that and think about what the Christmas story is all about, that he made room for you, it should change the way that we look at what we've been holding on to and also what we've been holding against the people around us, what we've been holding up in the people around us. You see, when God looks at your imperfection, he's not repulsed. And on the other side, when he looks at your strength and success, he's not impressed. He looks for people who make room to receive his favorite thing to give, his grace. He wants people to find their eternal significance in trusting him. When Jesus grew up and started talking about what life with God was all about, he wasn't giving advice. He wasn't going, hey, here are the 5 ways that you need to live in order to really impress God. If you do this well, God will be smiling double for you. No, that's not. No, he talked about what trusting God really looked like. At one point with his disciples, he said this, don't let your hearts be troubled. What have you been making room for? He said, trust in God and trust also in me. Make room for me in your life. Yes, that may mean you have to let go, surrender some control. Get, as much room as you give is as much as you're going to experience. So you're going to trust God. That's what he's saying. And here's why. He said, there's more than enough room in my Father's home. God made room for you and me. He said, if this were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? Jesus was trying to cast some vision that the work that he was about to accomplish was the necessary work to prepare a place of eternal belonging for him. After this, he's betrayed, arrested, and crucified. It's a brutal story. That crucifixion is symbolic of all of the spiritual injustice, guilt, shame, imperfection, sin that was unleashed upon Jesus in that moment. And it killed him. It crushed him. And that's not just why he came, not for that moment. It was 3 days later when he came back from the dead so that all authority on heaven and on earth would rest in him. In other words, there is no sin, no hurt, no injustice that Jesus cannot overcome. That's the message that we receive when we go, hope is not lost. He said this, when everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am. And you know the way to where I am going. And again, what I love about the Bible is its candid honesty. Look at what happens next. No, we don't, Lord. Thanks, Thomas. He's asking a great question. He's like, actually, I'm a little confused. He says, we have no idea where you're going. So how can we know the way? Jesus replied, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. She said, make room for me. Because in Jesus, he is the way that we discover our eternal belonging through what he accomplished for you that you could never do for yourself. His words about you are the truth of significance that you can begin to build your life on. And his life can bring any one of us back from the dead of any guilt, any sin, any hurt, any shame, any injustice. And so whatever you've been filling up your life with, you can trust that to him. Make room for him because he made room for you. And as you do, you sense that hope begins to rise. If you've never made room for Jesus in your life, I want to give you an opportunity to do that right now. It's not about impressing God. It's about receiving the grace that he offers. And so at every campus, with your heads bowed and eyes closed, if you've never received this gift of grace, then say the simple prayer of faith, of belief, understanding what Jesus did for you. And if you need words in the quietness of your heart, use these. God, today I want to make room for you. I realize that I can't do it on my own. I've filled my life with broken things. And so today I want to receive open-handedly the forgiveness that Jesus makes available at the cross. And I want to receive the eternal life that he made available when he came back from the dead. I believe Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Thank you for making room for me. If you prayed that prayer for the first time in the quietness of your heart, this Christmas is your most significant Christmas ever. Because today is the starting line of a journey of experiencing God changing you from the inside out. And I would love to help you mark this moment. It's a big deal for us around here, but I don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. So with heads bowed and eyes closed, I'd love to pray for those of you that prayed that prayer for the first time. So what I'd ask is that you just quietly slip your hand up in the seat that you sit, just quietly there. Leave it up for a second if you prayed that prayer for the first time. Thank you. Keep those hands up. Keep those hands up. If you prayed that prayer, just lift it up to help mark this moment for you, between you and God. God, thank you for every hand that's lifted. May they know how much they matter to you. And God, may this be the beginning of an incredible journey of faith for them in the new year. You can put your hands down. Thank you that with you, hope is not lost. Thank you for making room for us. And that's our hope. Hope, it's not just that hope is not lost. It's that when we make room for God, hope begins to rise inside of us as we discover that through him we can overcome anything. No one can steal our hope and joy because of what Jesus has done for us.
Jesus, you're my protector, in darkness my defender, so let our hope come alive. No one can stand against you, can't stop the light coming through. Let our hope come alive, yeah. Let all the strongholds come down, no fear, no shame, no more doubt. Let our hope come alive. Oh, the darkness can't stand against you, can't stop Jesus, our rescue. And let our hope come alive. Hope is rising. Jesus, you are here with us. Here right now. Hope is rising. Jesus, you